Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to do my review of AEW's Dynamite. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is for the International Championship. It is Orange Cassidy versus Claudio Castagnoli. I thought it was a good match, man. Back and forth matchup between Orange Cassidy and Claudio Castagnoli, with Claudio keeping the pace of the match. Hook comes down to the ring. Orange then hits a Stundog Millionaire on Claudio. Claudio then gets up, hits a giant swing in the middle of the ring on Orange Cassidy. Orange Cassidy then gets up, hits an orange punch on Claudio, as well as a beach break. And then Orange Cassidy ultimately hits a Hurricane Rana into a roll-up on Claudio, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Orange Cassidy. After the match, Jon Moxley comes down to the ring, attacks Orange Cassidy, as well as AEW security. So it looks like Jon Moxley has a lot of unfinished business with the AEW International Champion, Orange Cassidy. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. Is for the Ring of Honor 6-Man Tag Team Championships. It is the Young Bucks and Adam Page versus the Mogul Embassy. I thought it was a decent match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with the Young Bucks and Page keeping the pace of the match. Swerve is here, trying to cause a distraction. Page then chases after Swerve to the back, which allows Mogul Embassy to ultimately hit the finish. Pins for the 3. And your winners of the match and new Ring of Honor 6-Man Tag Team Champions are the Mogul Embassy. After the match, Matt Jackson seems to be frustrated with Adam Page and the situation. He grabs a chair. He starts taking the chair and hitting the ring post. It looks like he was completely pissed off after the match. So looks like there's some questions that need to be answered from Adam Page, especially due to the fact that he ran off and chased after Swerve, which allowed the Young Bucks and Page to lose the Ring of Honor 6-Man Tag Team Championships. Moving on from that, we have an Adam Copeland segment. Copeland comes down to the ring to be interviewed by Tony Schiavone. Adam then praises Tony Schiavone and says that he wears a lot of different hats backstage in AEW, and then that people actually, understood what he did backstage, that he probably get applauded every single night. Adam then goes ahead and talks about Sting and how they have a lot of similarities, especially the fact that they both sustained neck injuries in their career. Adam says he got a lot of respect for Sting and Darby Allin. He also says Darby Allin is the future of pro wrestling, especially in AEW. After he says that, Christian is here with Luchasaurus and Nick Wayne. Christian then says he's going to retire Sting at Full Gear. He also mocks Adam Copeland. And then Luchasaurus and Nick Wayne attack Adam Copeland. Then Sting comes down to the ring to try to save Adam Copeland. Darby then attacks Luchasaurus. Adam then hits a spear on Cage. And then Adam Copeland grabs a microphone and says it will be himself, Sting, and Darby Allin versus Nick Wayne, Christian Cage, and Luchasaurus at Full Gear. A couple of things I want to talk about this, man, when it pertains to Adam Copeland. He did an interview with Renee Paquette backstage and said that he wouldn't, never face off against Christian Cage. And it looks like Adam has changed his mind, which honestly, for what it's worth, I could have saw this coming. The match kind of writes itself, to be honest with you. And to see Sting and Darby team up with Adam Copeland is going to be absolutely awesome at Full Gear. And I'm definitely looking forward to that as well. Moving on from that, we have Tony Khan's infamous announcement that was supposed to shock the world. This was an absolute dud. Pretty much the announcement was basically early access tickets for All In, which All In takes place next year in August. Again, I'm going to touch bases on this and this whole Tony Khan thing towards the end of the podcast, but I will say this, man. The announcement was an absolute dud, in my honest opinion. I think it was going to go a lot of different ways. I know a lot of people were mentioning that Rampage might go to an all-women's show, or it might be an all-women's pay-per-view, or the possibility of, AEW working with HBO Max, and that clearly was not the case at this juncture. So, again, another one of those announcements from Tony Khan that was once again a dud. And like I said, I will give you guys more information about this and how I feel about Tony Khan's announcement towards the end of the podcast. But moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a tag team matchup. It is Kenny Omega once again teaming up with Chris Jericho versus Angelo Parker and Matt Menard. The match itself was a decent match, man. It was a back and forth matchup between both teams, with Omega and Jericho keeping the pace of the match. Jericho then applies the walls of Jericho on Parker, but the hold is broken. Jericho then hits a Judas effect on Parker, which allows Jericho and Omega to secure the win. After that, Don Callis then grabs a microphone. He says that the fight needs to go to the streets. and it needs to be a street fight, and Omega agrees to the street fight, but he also wants Kota Ibushi involved in the match as well. Jericho then also brings in none other than Paul White. He's going to be also available for this match, this street fight match, if you will, in Canada, I believe in 2 weeks. And like I said, it looks like it's going to be Omega, Jericho, Paul White, and Ibushi versus the Don Callis family in 2 weeks. A couple things I want to say about this, man. And again, I'm going to, give more information about how I feel about Dynamite towards the end of the podcast, but this was another dud, in my honest opinion, man. And I'm not taking anything away from Kota Ibushi or anything else like that. This more, leans towards Paul White. And my issue with this. My issue with, bringing in Paul, to be honest with you, is, it's great to have Big Show or Paul White, if you will, in AEW. And I'm not taking anything away from his career and his accolades and what he's done from, his early days in WWE, obviously his early days in pro wrestling in his career with WCW when he was the Giant. Paul White's had a hell of a career. I'm not taking anything away from Paul White or the Big Show or whatever anybody wants to call him, the Giant. But man, you start to really, when he walked out to the ring, or on the stage at least, he can hardly walk, bro. I mean, his knees are starting to come in a little bit. He looks like he's having a hard time walking. I don't really think he needs to be in a match. And again, it's not my choice to say whether he can wrestle or he can't. But the fact of the matter is, the man can hardly walk. And to be honest with you, I don't know how Paul White really fits into the mold with this matchup. I mean, I understand Jericho got beat down by Powerhouse Hobbs, and Powerhouse Hobbs, he's a freak athlete, man. I'm not taking anything away from Hobbs, but I don't think bringing in Paul White is the guy that you should be bringing in to face off against Powerhouse Hobbs. I just don't think it's needed. I think, honestly, it's the same thing I said about Jeff Jarrett. And Jeff Jarrett, obviously, out of the two, between him and Paul White, I think Jarrett's a little bit more healthier and is more match ready, I would say, than Paul White is. But, Jeff Jarrett and Paul White need to have more backstage roles and not really be on air. I know there was even people hitting around that Mark Henry was trying to come back. And to be honest with you, I would be more, acceptable for Mark Henry than Paul White. I think Mark Henry can still go. I think, him being healthy, athletic-wise, I think it would have been better for Mark Henry to, debut in the ring with AEW, with teaming up with Jericho and Omega, than Paul White. I just think Paul White, you're taking a big chance, man. That's all I'm saying. I'm not taking anything away from the guy's career, but, the man can hardly walk. And you're going to put him in a match. And I know he still wants to have matches in AEW. I know he filed for the trademark for Captain Insano from his TV role with the Waterboy, which I think is awesome. I think, obviously a lot of people love nostalgia, whether it's in professional wrestling or any kind of sport for that matter. But, as far as Paul being in the ring, I would be very careful with what you're going to do with Paul White in this matchup, especially it being a street fight. So I'm just saying, maybe Paul White was not the right choice to go with as far as being involved in this matchup. Moving on from that, Willow Nightingale versus Shida for the AEW Women's Championship. It was a solid matchup, back and forth matchup between Willow and Shida, with Willow keeping the pace of the match. Willow and Shida then both exchange, with Shida ultimately hitting an Avalanche Falcon Arrow. Well, hitting an Avalanche Falcon Arrow on Willow. Willow then gets up, hits a Death Valley driver for a near fall on Shida, but Shida ultimately hits the finish on Willow, pins her for the 3, and your winner of the match, and still AEW Women's Champion, is Shida. After the match, Toni Storm comes down to the ring, or tries to come down to the ring. Shida then attacks Toni Storm on the ramp. The lights go out, then Julia Hart is in the ring. Sky Blue ends up coming down to the ring as well, and she ends up spraying mist, being Sky Blue, in the face of Julia Hart. Couple things I want to say about this too, man, and it really pertains to Willow Nightingale. I have a lot of praise for Willow. I think Willow, sky's the limit for Willow Nightingale, but I will say this, and again, I will reiterate this towards the end of the podcast. I don't understand why Willow was booked in this match, especially due to the fact that she just got out of I believe it was a triple threat or fatal four-way matchup for the number one contender for the AEW Women's Championship, and Abaddon won that match and lost clean to Shida on Collision. So I don't understand how, it goes from Willow losing that matchup to Willow getting a title shot. And again, I will, reiterate this more, about this whole situation towards the end of the podcast. But there's definitely some creative issues that's going on backstage. And like I said, I'll get into more detail on that towards the end of the podcast. But again, hats off to Shida for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of Dynamite. It is MJF versus Bullet Club Gold. And MJF was trying to find some partners to team up with him in this matchup. And it's none other than the Acclaimed. The Acclaimed end up joining forces with MJF, and the match was decent. It was a back-and-forth matchup between both teams with MJF and the Acclaimed keeping the pace of the match. MJF then hits a kangaroo kick, but Jay White ultimately hits a Blade Runner, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Bullet Club Gold. Hats off to Bullet Club Gold for getting the win in this matchup. All right, a couple things I want to get into, man. I know I touched bases on this a couple times throughout this podcast this evening. And my takes on, as far as the Willow situation, not really a situation, but the way that things are being booked on AEW, obviously the Tony Khan announcement flop. I want to get into more detail about that with you guys and really tell you how I feel about that and where I think AEW is going to be leading towards in the future as far as the direction of the company, in my opinion. Number one, the Tony Khan announcement. This was a humongous flop. To be honest with you, man. And to be honest with you, I mean, it's been countless times where Tony Khan has announced and had these announcements for these announcements about, they're going to make a breaking news announcement and stuff like that. And sometimes it's been all right, but there are those times where it's been a complete flop. And I truly believe that this was a desperation move by Tony Khan. For an abundance of reasons, man. You're putting tickets on sale, pre-sale, for a show that's not going to happen until next year in August. So let's look at that for a second. Number one, you don't even know who's going to be on the card. Okay, number one. Even though it's in Wembley. Okay, so it should be a decent card at best. So there's that. Number two, and this is one of the biggest ones, you also had the holidays right around the corner. I mean, you're like, next month is Christmas. I don't think a lot of people are going to be wanting to buy tickets off the rip right now with the holiday season coming up. And number three, with AEW having abundance of injuries and a lot of top talent possibly not being available for that card. It can be a Bryan Danielson, Adam Cole, who knows? We don't even know if these talents are going to be healthy by All In at Wembley. We don't even know if Bryan Danielson's going to be a part of Wembley. We have no idea. So you're taking a humongous chance. And to be honest with you, there was even a commercial prior to Dynamite where it was almost half the women's roster. It had Saraya, it had Nyla Rose, Britt Baker was on there. There was no sign of Thunder Rosa on there, but there was different talents. Willow Nightingale was also a part of it, and it was, a great commercial. So my first initial impression of what this announcement was going to be from Tony Khan was whether it was going to be a all-women's pay-per-view, which was, after the commercial had aired, it was heavily rumored that it might be an all-women's pay-per-view, like how WWE did with Empower. I think that was about 5 years ago. I thought that was the route that they were going to go. There was also rumors that Rampage was going to change its format and go into an all-women show. And then obviously the, HBO Max deal. To be honest with you, man, I don't know what the hell's going on. And to be honest with you, I don't know why Tony Khan wanted to pull the trigger on pre-sale tickets for a show that's not until next year. To be honest with you, I think it's a desperation move by AEW and Tony Khan. And to be honest with you, I mean, it's just a sign of desperation. And the other thing I want to get into, and I really want to touch bases on, is the creative. There's been a lot of speculation about AEW's creative right now being in the absolute toilet. And a lot of people on the roster are starting to get pissed off because they're not being booked. Storylines are falling through last minute. Changes are being changed last minute for matches. And it's starting to piss off a lot of talent. And they're not really happy. And to be honest with you, a lot of people have been mentioning that this is starting to sound like WWE, where Vince would come in and he would completely change the format last minute on a Monday Night Raw or a Friday Night SmackDown, and he would just completely, fly off the rails on creative for that night. And it kind of seems like that's what AEW is doing. And for what it's worth, Dynamite last night really didn't help that in the favor of, okay, that's not the case. No, it seems like that might be the case, where creative is all over the place. And I mentioned this, even with this whole storyline with MJF and, Samoa Joe and Kenny Omega and now Wardlow chasing after MJF and saying, you took everything away from me and now I'm going to take everything away from you. Well, with all due respect to Wardlow, what the hell did he really take away from you? It doesn't even make sense. I mean, the original storyline that you guys had was Golden, where Wardlow was employed with MJF when MJF had Pinnacle. And he was, Wardlow was contractually obligated to stick around with MJF until his contract was up, or his contract being on the line with the match against MJF. Well, that match has already happened, and Wardlow had beat MJF clean. And then Wardlow went on to win the TNT Championship, and obviously he hot potatoed that belt for months. And I mentioned this multiple times in the past, after he had that great storyline with MJF, his first match after that great storyline was JD Drake. Clearly you had no signs on what the hell to do with Wardlow at the time. So Wardlow now is chasing after the World Championship. Why? There's no need for it. You've done nothing. You just came back into the fold. And now you want a title shot when you faced absolute jobbers. Give me a fucking break. Seriously. Like, what the hell are we doing here with this? I mean, and I mentioned this multiple times in the past about Wardlow, man. Wardlow is on the short track list to WWE. Why? Because Tony Khan and AEW have no idea what the hell to do with Wardlow. They don't, man. It's tragic. But now you're going to put him in the title picture against MJF when he's done absolute nothing. He's done absolute nothing. What the hell is, what has Wardlow done to grant it, to give him a title shot? Nothing. Nothing. And this whole thing where you took everything away from me, what the hell did MJF take away from you? You beat him clean. You got the hell away from him. And then after that, you won the TNT Championship. So really, the storyline makes no sense at all. It doesn't. The other thing I want to touch bases on as well is, the Devil's Mask. Who's wearing the Devil's Mask? Now, I mentioned this multiple times now for the past 2-3 weeks that I think it's Adam Cole. There's another person I think it might be as well. And this might be, a hot take for most people, but just hear me out. It also could be Jack Perry. And the reason why I'm saying that is because Jack Perry's been off TV since All In. And, it seems like Tony Khan and the creative team that he has a hard time bringing back talent into the fold and putting them in storylines. Like, for example, Thunder Rosa. Thunder Rosa has been cleared, medically cleared, and ready to go, and she's still just doing commentating for Collision and doing nothing. This will be a great idea if it is Jack Perry to bring him back into the fold. Now, some people may say, well, how does this relate and how does the storyline relate into Jack Perry? Well, before, Jack had matches with CM Punk that ultimately, put him on the shelf for, it's since August, MJF and Jack, kind of had it back and forth. And Jack Perry ended up going from babyface to heel. So, again, it could be Jack or it could be Adam Cole. I know a lot of people are saying this MJF. To be honest with y'all, man, if it is MJF in the Devil's Mask, I think a lot of people are going to be really, really disappointed. To be honest with you. It needs to be somebody else. It does not need to be MJF. It can be Cole, it can be Jack Perry, or hell, it can even be Kyle O'Reilly. And this is one way to bring in Kyle O'Reilly back into the fold since he's been injured. But I don't know if he's even medically cleared, ready to go. Who knows? I have no idea. But I will say this. Eventually, we need to start figuring out who the hell is in that Devil's Mask, because eventually that storyline's going to get old. And I know some people might disagree with me, but all you're seeing is somebody wearing this devil mask and then not seeing anything, nothing, and the camera goes out and we go into a new feed. There needs to be more. I understand they're trying to keep the storyline still, hot and ready to go, but there needs to start being some aspects into the storyline where you start slowly depicting who the hell this person might be. Especially leading up to Full Gear, because as it stands right now, MJF is supposed to defend the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships against the Gun Club on the 0 hour, I believe, on Full Gear, with MJF supposedly supposed to have a mystery tag team partner to defend those Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships. So I think at that point, that person that should be teaming up with MJF to defend those Ring of Honor Tag Team Championships should be the person who's underneath the Devil's Mask. And I know some people were saying, oh, it could be Britt Baker. To be honest with you, I think that's a long shot. I think Baker being the person in the Devil's Mask is a definite long shot. I don't know how Baker even would fit into the mold of that. Now, obviously, she's with Adam Cole, and I understand that. But as far as storyline's concerned, I don't know how Baker really fits into that fold with the Devil's Mask, to be honest with you. But all in all, man, I can't sit here and say that Dynamite last night was a solid show. From the creative aspect to the announcement that was a humongous flop by Tony Khan, to Willow being in a championship match when she lost a number one contendership match in, I believe, a fatal four-way, and then a week later you book her in a match against Shida for the AEW Women's Championship. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And I mentioned this multiple times about Tony Khan, man. Tony Khan wears a lot of hats, man. He, creative team, he's a CEO, general manager, if you will, of AEW. He's also, doing a lot of work with Ring of Honor, booking shows for Rampage, Collision. He's wearing a lot of hats right now. And to be honest with you, I think at some point AEW does need to consider bringing in somebody to be an on-air general manager. I think it's definitely needed. And I don't think, obviously WWE is doing the same thing right now with, Adam Pearce, taking over Monday Night Raw for GM, and then Nick Aldis coming into the fold and being the general manager, on-air general manager for SmackDown. But I don't think it's a bad idea for Tony Khan and AEW to have somebody like that. When they had William Regal, it was a perfect fit for Regal to be that guy. Unfortunately, Regal's no longer with the company, and he's working exclusively with NXT. But he has a great mind for the business. You can't knock Regal for what he's done, especially when NXT was a black and gold brand, and they were putting on, absolute banger of matches. And those takeovers back in the day were absolutely phenomenal. If you guys watch NXT back in the day, the black and gold brand, you couldn't touch those takeovers, man. Those takeovers were literally, no pun intended, were taking over, main event pay-per-views and pulling in main roster pay-per-view numbers just with those takeovers, man. It was flawless. And the roster that NXT Black and Gold had back in the day was just awesome. It was matches with Gargano and Ciampa and Cole and Keith Lee and Andrade. Insane. The storylines alone on NXT Black and Gold were just phenomenal. But yeah, the funny thing is, long story short, Tony Khan and AEW, their whole mission statement was, we want to be the alternative. We want to be different. We don't want to be like WWE. But I can tell you all this, man, for the past few weeks, minus a couple things like the storyline with, the Devil's Mask and stuff like that, and what MJF has been doing, and some small things here and there. Besides that, it's starting to have a lot of feeling of WWE. I don't think the word alternative really fits into the mold right now with AEW, where it currently stands. I just don't. And I know some people were like, oh, you might be an AEW fan or an elitist. I'm not. If the shit sucks, the shit sucks. And last night, the shit was horrible. It was, man. I don't know where the hell they're going with this shit at this point. I really don't. Wardlow trying to chase after MJF for the World Championship. What the hell have you done? What have you done? You sat on your ass for 8 months and done nothing. When you were medically cleared to go. And now the only way they brought you back into the fold again, creatively, is put you in the mix with MJF. What have you done up to this point to even earn a title shot? You haven't done shit. He's done nothing. I'm sorry if you're a humongous Wardlow fan out there, but the man has done nothing to warrant a title shot against MJF. Nothing. And then you look at Samoa Joe. Does he deserve a title shot? Absolutely. You want to know why? Because Joe already faced off against MJF. MJF did beat Joe, but do I believe Joe deserves a rematch? Absolutely. Absolutely. Powerhouse Hobbs, even. Does he deserve a title shot? Absolutely. He's putting in the work, man. He hasn't been sitting on his ass for 8 months doing nothing. He's been having great matches. He destroyed Jericho and then joined the likes of Don Callis and joined the Don Callis family. Powerhouse Hobbs is a workhorse, man. The guy deserves a title shot. I said the same thing about other, people on the roster as well. Number one being Swerve. Swerve deserves a title shot. Now, obviously, he's a great storyline right now with Adam Page that's starting to really heat up, which I'm all for it. I'm all for it. For an abundance of reasons, it gets Swerve in a primary, storyline, gets him on TV more, which is great. And not only that, it gives Page something to do because Page wasn't doing a damn thing. He wasn't. Before Swerve came along, Page wasn't doing anything. The last time, in my opinion, that Page was doing anything that was remotely interesting, storyline based, was the storyline that he had ongoing with Jon Moxley. That was the last time that Page was in a predominant storyline that actually meant a damn. But after that storyline, what is next for Page? Right now, it's Swerve. Without Swerve, I don't think there'd be much for Page to do right now, to be honest. And I'm all for it. But again, the show last night it was abysmal, man. It just wasn't that damn good. And I'm not sitting here saying that every single Dynamite needs to be, top notch. No. But it also needs to make sense. And here's the other thing, Collision. This past Saturday. One of the reasons why the review didn't go out is because, honestly, the entire show was based around the main event. And honestly, if we're looking from the demo of Collision, the ratings were in the toilet. It wasn't that good. Even though they had one of the best matches probably the best main event on Collision to date, with MJF going up against Kenny Omega. And those two guys right there, they tore the house down that night. So we're looking at it from a rating standpoint. Yeah, it was a disappointment. It was a letdown. Now, do I personally believe that? No. I think the match was awesome. To me, it was a 4-star match, 5-star match. It should have been a pay-per-view. It was a pay-per-view quality match for Collision. And for what it's worth, MJF, really, he was hanging in there with Omega. And there was times where he actually made, he was doing a lot better in the ring than Omega was. And Omega, he gave him his props, man. He gave him his flowers, gave him his respect. Right now with what MJF is doing right now is probably the best thing that's going right now in AEW. And on top of that, you also have the World's End pay-per-view that's taking place in Long Island at the Nassau Coliseum, December 30th, and then MJF's contract's up January 2024. The storyline fits perfectly right now with MJF. And to be honest with you, and I mentioned this multiple times in the past. I even mentioned this last week, that there are some superstars that might leave AEW that, won't necessarily cripple the brand. But if MJF decides to say the hell with it and go over to WWE, which who knows at this point, I'd be very surprised if he does. But if he decides to go to WWE, that's one of those guys that if he leaves, it's going to crush that brand. There's that type of guy right there, and those type of wrestlers on that roster, whether it's men or women, that leave can really be, crucial on AEW. Because I can tell you this right now, as a fan, I think if MJF were to leave AEW, go over to WWE, there's going to be a lot of fans that were with AEW when the beginning with MJF showed up. And when he goes over to WWE, a lot of those fans are going to be going over to WWE or wherever he decides to go. I think a lot of people tune in and go to these shows because of MJF. He's a household name for AEW, and he's making a hell of a name for himself. But other than that, it wasn't that great of a show last night, in my opinion. I think AEW has a lot of stuff they need to fix, especially creatively moving forward. And hopefully the show gets better, man, because last night was an absolute dud, especially the announcement from Tony Khan on the pre-sale tickets for All In. That announcement could have been tweeted rather than, taking up airtime for a pre-sale for All In that takes place next year in August. Really wasn't that much of a worldwide announcement, in my honest opinion. But with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Dynamite. I hope you guys are out there staying safe, be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.